All right. Looks like we're getting to a critical mass. Again, want to thank everybody for joining. My name is Torrance Spencer. I'm a program manager with the Electrification Coalition. Want to welcome you all to Which Price is Right, a municipal guide to sustainable public EV charging rates. It's a very useful conversation. We've had a lot of interest with partners and municipalities recently and before on information on this topic. We'll do our best to cover as much as we can in the amount of time we have. But in addition to myself, we also have Kayla Betzold with the city of Rochester, Minnesota, making a guest appearance, running through Rochester's methodology on how they priced their EV chargers in the city. I want to give Kayla a quick opportunity to say hello to the gang, and then we'll get going.
Hi, everyone. Kayla Betzold, City of Rochester, Minnesota. Thanks for having me today. I'm really excited to kind of just share a little bit about Rochester and how we ended up kind of selecting our rate structure and the research that kind of went into it. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We will jump right into it. If you are having some technical issues, take a second, turn up your volume, maybe jump out, jump back in. But I think all of our tech on this side is working. Thank you, everybody, for working together in the chat. Teamwork makes the dream work. Excellent job. But before we get started, want to give everybody some information about the Electrification Coalition. The Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that works to accelerate the widespread adoption of all types of electric vehicles to overcome economic, public health, but mostly national security challenges that have long stemmed from America's dependence on oil. We've had tremendous success working with both sides of the aisle in DC, using this methodology, and we very much look forward to working with a bipartisan cohort of Congresspeople in DC, but also with different folks in different cities all across states to help move EVs forward. But a little bit more about this session. Again, want to welcome everybody. Glad you can join us because we're going to cover quite a bit today. It's something that affects a lot of municipalities investing in public electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or EVSE for short. And yet it's one of the most underexamined decisions in fleet and transportation planning. The premise of today is straightforward. Setting the right price for public EV charging is one of the most consequential and sometimes most overlooked decisions for your city or municipality can actually make. But we've seen communities invest thousands of dollars recently in charging infrastructure. Some of those watch those assets underperform or stall because the pricing structure wasn't necessarily designed to sustain operations over time. So we're here to change that. So what we'll cover today is why pricing matters more than most planners expect. We'll go over a step-by-step cost recovery methodology. We will go over how to conduct a competitive rate analysis for your market. We'll work on planning for equipment replacement savings, and finally, a replicable pricing guide that you can take back to your teams in your cities. And by the end of this session, hopefully, you have a clear framework your procurement and operations teams can put to work, hopefully immediately. But we want to go into why EV charging pricing is a strategic decision. I got to start with the why. Why does pricing matter so much? And that's because a charging station that's priced wrong, either too high or too low, creates problems that compound over time. Pricing it too high, you deter the very EV drivers you're trying to serve. Utilization can drop, your chargers sit idle, your investment doesn't deliver the public value that you want it to, and it's harder to justify future funding, and future funding is obviously one of the most important parts. Price it too low, you're essentially subsidizing charging sessions out of your general operations budget, which we know are constantly getting pinched. We don't necessarily have the funds to do that. It's not fully sustainable, especially as equipment gets older, electricity rates change, and demand grows. The goal isn't the lowest price, and it's not the highest price in the market will bear either. The goal is a price that is defensible, durable, and designed to sustain itself. So, with that said, there are three pricing failure modes that we typically see municipalities fall into, and either uh, multiples or at least one of these traps. The first one is the free charging trap. Some cities launch with free charging as a community benefit or to drive EV adoption, sometimes due to grants. It's understandable in year one, but free charging is not a pricing strategy. It's a subsidy without a full exit plan put into place. And when initial grant money runs out, the operation falls apart. The second one, the cost plus miscalculation. Cities calculate what electricity costs then and add a small margin. It sounds logical, uh, but this approach often leads or misses network feeds, maintenance cost, and long-term capital replacement. You end up recovering maybe 60 cents on every dollar you're actually spending, and you need to recover uh, most of that spent cost or more than that spent cost. And the third one is a set it and forget it rate. A rate is established at launch. It's never really revisited. Meanwhile, electricity costs change, competitive options emerge, and your equipment depreciates. A rate that worked in year one, maybe leaving money on the table or costing you money by year 3 or 4. But what we're going to be building today is a methodology that avoids these three traps, and it starts with cost recovery. So you're going to know what you're actually spending. And we'll go to the next slide. Here we go. Cost recovery is the foundation of any sustainable EV charging rate. And the first step is understanding the true all-in cost of delivering a charging session, not just the electricity, but everything else that's included. The full cost stack is the complete picture of what it costs to run a public charging station. So you have to figure out what that entails. It entails 5 different layers. The first one is energy costs. This is your cost per kilowatt hour from your utility, including any demand charges. Demand charges are important for DC fast chargers. A single high draw session can spike your monthly demand charge significantly. You need to understand your utility rate structure, not just your per kilowatt hour rate. Definitely get in touch with your utility yesterday if you have not done so. Layer 2 is network and software fees. Most commercial EVSE requires a network subscription for payment processing, remote monitoring, data reporting. These fees are often structured as flat rates, but they can be factored in per session. Layer 3 is operations and maintenance. Who handles the hardware issues? What's your service contract? What's your average response time and cost per maintenance event? Even well-maintained equipment will require periodic attention, and unplanned downtime has its own costs and lost revenue and public trust. The fourth one is site costs, parking, lighting, signage, ADA compliance. There's a lot of things to think about. And if your charging stations occupy public or municipal property, there's a cost to that space, even if it's internal. And the last one is administrative overhead. Billing reconciliation, compliance reporting, customer support. These are real operational hours that belong in your cost model that often go forgotten or unnoticed. But in cost recovery as well is building your cost per session model. Once you've identified all the 5 layers of your cost stack, you can translate them into a cost per session. And there's a simplified version of how the math works. You start with your monthly fixed costs, network fees, maintenance contracts, site cost, overhead. Divide your average number of monthly sessions, and that gives you your fixed cost per session. Then you add your variable cost per session, primarily energy. Take your average energy delivered per session in kilowatt hours, multiply by your blended cost per kilowatt hour, including demand charges. Then you have your variable costs. Add them together, then you have your break-even rate. That's the floor. You should not realistically price below that number. Unfortunately, many municipalities currently pricing below this number without fully realizing it. That's why we have to revisit these rates on a fairly regular basis. But at the end of this session, we'll be sharing an Excel tool available at electrificationcoalition.org. And that will walk your team through this calculation with your own numbers. There's all sorts of sample numbers in there, but you can adjust them for your specific municipality. But hold on to that link, and that's one of our most practical takeaways from today. And then on our next slide, we will go over competitive rate analysis. Once you know your costs, the next step is understanding your competitive landscape. Your charging rate doesn't exist in a vacuum. EV drivers have a lot of options, and pricing signals something about your city's commitment to EV infrastructure. You're competing with multiple different options. EV drivers are comparing your public chargers against several alternatives. Home charging is the baseline. Most EV owners charge primarily at home, whether it be in a garage, super convenient, or at chargers at multi-unit dwellings, which are going in at a pretty steady rate. Your public rate needs to be competitive enough to be viable alternative, not just an emergency fallback or backup. Second one is workplace charging. If local employers offer subsidized or free charging to their employees, that shapes driver expectations. Retail and hospitality chargers, places like grocery stores, hotels, malls, they're all increasingly deploying chargers as amenities, sometimes at discounted or free rates. And then lastly, regional public networks. ChargePoint, Blink, EVgo, Iona, all of the others operate a lot of metro areas, and their published retail rates are highly visible and frequently referenced by drivers. So with those competitors taken accounted for, you have a couple steps to conduct your rate analysis. Step one is mapping your landscape. You can use all sorts of different tools available to you online. You can use PlugShare, Department of Energy's Alternative Fuels Station Locator, or network operator portals to identify all the public chargers within a meaningful radius, maybe 5 to 10 miles of your downtown, your offices, or your expected service area. Step two, you record published rates. Note whether each charging station charges per kilowatt hour, per minute, per session, or some combination. Note the level of charging, whether that be level 2 or DC fast charging, sometimes called level 3. And note the network operator. Build a simple comparison table between all those different options. Step 3, adjust for comparability. A per minute rate and a per kilowatt hour rate aren't directly comparable. Convert everything to an effective cost per kilowatt hour using average charging rates for common vehicles. This can give you an apples to apples view of your full market. And then the last step, identify your position. Where do you want to sit in landscape? Do you want to sit at market? Do you want to sit below market to drive utilization at a modest premium if your location and reliability justify it? There's not a single right answer, but it should be a deliberate choice, not an accident. An important note, competitive rate analysis isn't about matching the lowest rate in your market. It's about understanding the context your rates will be evaluated in and making sure your pricing is coherent with your city's goals. But beyond that is replacement savings. Not just the pricing per session for the electricity, for everything like that. There's all sorts of foresight you have to involve as well. This is where long-term charging sustainability lives. The replacement cost reality is that EVSE equipment has a lifespan. Level 2 chargers are generally expected to last about a decade. DC fast chargers, sometimes more complex, are running closer to 7 to 10 years before major component replacement or unit swaps. That means every charging station you install today will realistically need to be replaced partially or fully within your planning horizon. The cost of the replacement, which can range from a few $1,000s for per port for level 2 and sometimes 5 or 6 figures for DCFC, is a real capital expenditure that needs to come from somewhere. The questions are, will your charging rates have helped fund that replacement, or will you be competing for funding, hoping the economic landscape looks the same a decade from now? Spoiler alert, it probably won't look exactly the same. So to avoid that, build replacement savings into your rate. The methodology here is simple and it's similar to a sinking fund. It's a familiar concept to all of you in municipal finance. Calculate the expected cost to replace your equipment, amortize it over its useful life, divide by your projected number of sessions, and add that figure to your per session rate. A simple example, simple is relative, but suppose you have a dual port level 2 charger with a 10-year useful life. Replacement cost estimate is $12,000, including installation, over 10 years at an average of 3,000 sessions per port per year. That's 30,000 sessions per port, or 60,000 total. Your replacement savings contribution is $12,000 divided by 60,000, divided by 60,000 sessions. It's just 20 cents per session. 20 cents per session is almost an invisible addition to your rate, but compounded over a decade, it means you've funded your own equipment replacement without needing a grant, a budget allocation, or a rate crisis. This is also the conversation you have to have with your finance and procurement teams because it changes the framing from charging revenue covers operating costs to charging revenue covers operating costs and builds a capital reserve. That's a fundamentally more resilient infrastructure model. Lastly, adjusting for inflation and evolving technology. The charger you'll need to replace in year 10 may be significantly different from what you installed in year 1. Build a model inflation assumption 2 to 3% annually and revisit your replacement projections every 2 to 3 years as a part of your regular rate review cycle. Definitely be reviewing your rate cycle as often as you can to stay up to date on it. But next, we'll be building your pricing model, putting it all together. You've mapped your cost, you've analyzed your competitive landscape, you've built a replacement savings contribution. Now you have a sustainable rate formula. It has 4 different components. Component 1 is your fixed cost per session, your network fees, maintenance, site costs, admin overhead allocated per session. Variable cost per session, your energy per session, including demand charge allocation, replacement savings contribution, your capital reserve per session, and then target margin, which is a modest buffer, typically 5 to 15%. That covers unforeseen costs. It allows for rate stability, builds organizational confidence in your programming. And add those 4 together and you have a rate floor. That's the minimum you should charge to operate sustainably. From there, use your competitive rate analysis that you've already done to position your final published rate within your market context. But next, we have pricing structure options. That final consideration before we get to the pricing guide, how you structure your rate matters as much as the rate itself. Your options include per kilowatt hour pricing. That's the most transparent and equitable. It reflects actual energy delivered, but it's not available in all states. It's due to utility regulations. So know your jurisdiction, know your rules. If per kilowatt hour pricing is not available, per minute pricing is there. It's simpler to implement and utility agnostic, but it can penalize slower charging vehicles. It works better for level 2 than it does for DCFC. Third option is session fees. You can have a flat charge per plugin. It's simple, but it doesn't account for variable energy use. It's best combined with per kilowatt hour or per minute pricing. And the last one is tiered for time of use rates. That's not nearly as common. It can shift demand away from peak hours, reduce demand charges, and better align with utility rate structure, but it's more complex to communicate, but increasingly standard. For most munis, we recommend per kilowatt hour base rate where legally permitted, but with an optional session fee for administrative recovery. You can add time of use tiers once your utilization data is strong enough to support the communication burden. But we actually have a couple charging fee examples from a couple cities that the Electrification Coalition has had the pleasure to work with. In the city of Bellingham, Washington, they do a quarter per kilowatt hour while charging. There's also a quarter per minute for occupying the parking space after a vehicle is charging complete. Idle fees are a great way to increase your utilization. So you can have folks come in, pay attention to it. If they're not paying attention, there's charge more. You can bring that into savings. So a good tool to have in your back pocket. And then an additional fee of $1 per session when using DCFC. In San Jose, the fees are covered for the city's cost to operate the chargers, and they do time of use. So super off peak is a quarter per kilowatt hour, off peak is 35 cents, and peak is 45 cents. So adjusting it based on different types of day. And then in New York City, DCFC is 39 cents per kilowatt hour, obviously more expensive than level two, or it's 52 cents per kilowatt hour with different locations. Drivers have to pay for parking in addition to charging, but level two curbside is 250 an hour as opposed to per kilowatt hour rates. So a lot of different ways to do this. No one way is correct, but it's a good exercise in finding what works for you in your municipality. And one of our last sections is your replicable pricing guide. Before we go to Kayla with Rochester's methodology, I want to leave you with something concrete and actionable. Everything we've covered today, the cost stack, competitive analysis, replacement savings, it fits into a 5-step pricing guide for your teams that you can follow. So step one would be to build your full cost stack, document all 5 layers that you need to pay for: energy, network fees, O&M, site cost, admin. Calculate a total monthly cost and divide by your average monthly sessions to get your fixed cost per session, and then add your variable energy cost per session to that. Step two would be to add your replacement savings contribution. Estimate your equipment replacement costs, divide by the projected useful life in sessions, and add this per session amount to your cost base. Step three is to conduct a competitive rate analysis, map your local charging landscape, normalize all competitor rates to a per kilowatt hour equivalent, and determine where you want to position your rate within that market. Then apply a target margin, 5 to 15% on your cost base for resilience and rate stability. This is your recommended floor rate. And then the final step is choose your rate structure and review cadence. Decide on per kilowatt hour, per minute, hybrid pricing, but set a formal rate review cycle. Recommend annually or whenever your electricity rate or network fees change significantly. But we'll be sharing a downloadable Excel worksheet from a link at electrificationcoalition.org. We'll put that in the chat, and we'll share that post-webinar as well. The worksheet includes formulas, sample completed model to start, and a glossary of terms. We'll take a quick minute at the end of the webinar here to go over that a little bit more, but want to finish this section and hand it over to Kayla Betzold with the City of Rochester, Minnesota. Kayla is the Sustainability Coordinator and has been for a number of years. Kayla, I will turn it over to you to give us an idea of how Rochester has gone through a similar process and your successes and questions and maybe stumbles along the way.
Sure, thank you. Yes, and thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. I'm Kayla Betzold with the City of Rochester. Just a few things that I wanted to mention from Torrance kind of talk right before me. I thought there were some really interesting pieces that I think will kind of come up in what I'm about to share as well. The first was the comment on there being lots of different options for EV drivers. I think that's something that we considered through our process is our city stations are not the only stations that people have to go to. And so that really kind of came into our analysis and was part of, I think, what what led us to the rate structure that we did. Also, I think as he shared the 3 different rate structures from 3 different cities, I think we're already seeing that there are a lot of different ways that cities can go from, the charge to the idle fees to, charging for the spaces and things like that. And so I think this is starting to illustrate that this is a really complex topic. There are, hundreds of different ways that people, municipalities can choose to go with this. And I think it really shows that, like Torin said, setting your city's goals first and really thinking through what are our goals? What do we want to provide through this service for our community? I think really helps to kind of set the stage for where you might land in kind of the different options for rate structures. Um, so with that, hi everyone, I'm Kayla. I have been with the city of Rochester for about 2 years. Before that, the rest of my career was out in Colorado. So if anyone is here from Colorado, hello to all my Colorado people. But from the Midwest, I'm happy to be back in Minnesota and excited to be working with the city of Rochester. We are a city of about 125,000 residents, and we're Minnesota's third largest city after Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we are also the home to the Mayo Clinic. And so they're kind of one of our major partners, also installing significant amounts of public EV charging stations with their redevelopment of their downtown campus. So I think over 100 EV charging stations are going in at Mayo. So again, options for people in the community. Next slide, please. So when I kind of started this project, I was looking at, where we were at kind of when I came in. And so we had a network of public charging stations available. They were at, downtown parking ramps, outside public facilities and municipal sites. Mostly had been grant funded through, different state initiatives in the past. And for that reason, it was kind of a hodgepodge. So there were different companies, we had different company chargers. Some were free, some had rate structures, some were hourly, some were not. And so, it really was kind of all over the board. And so that was really the motivation for why we started this project. We felt that, as our charging network expands, this inconsistent pricing, really no policy to lead departments when they're, wanting to purchase new chargers, or, if we're required to, based on our zoning code. I will mention in our zoning code, we do require EV charging for surface parking lots, 50 parking spaces or more. And so we have city facilities coming online that we're building that will require charging. And so these questions kind of continue to come up from, what type of charger, what brand of charger, to how do we set the rates, what should they be, things like that. So I think that's kind of what motivated this project in 2025 to really develop a clear citywide policy. And I think really we were asking ourselves, how do we balance the affordability for residents with the equity and fairness piece, and also accessibility? So making sure that these chargers are available, people aren't staying at them for a long time. How do we, like Torin mentioned, not set charging rates that decrease the utilization rate? And then, that kind of is counterintuitive to what we're trying to do as well. And then recover, some or I guess a certain amount of the cost. And, this was a technical project. It's also a policy project as well. So ultimately, it was a lot of conversations with, city council and understanding what are their goals, what sorts of kind of cost recovery structures are they comfortable with. Next slide. So a little bit about our process. This is very similar, I think, to what Torin just went over. So I think it matches well. But first, looking at, again, what does our existing inventory look like? So how many chargers do we have? Pulling the metrics that we have from the chargers that we had metrics for, because some we didn't. But looking at usage, utilization, how long are people staying at these chargers after they're done charging, all of that kind of came into play. Then we took a look at the regional landscape. So what are other charging rates in Rochester? What are other charging rates in in municipalities in Minnesota and kind of in this region, and how can we set a rate that compares? We looked at the pros and cons of the hourly rate versus the per kWh pricing models. Like I said, the stations that we did have rates for had hourly rates. And so kind of making that change was part of the process as well. We developed cost recovery scenarios based on our existing costs and based on, our annual costs, station costs, things like that. And then we really did gather a lot of input. So we talked multiple times. One thing I didn't put on here is a staff group. So after we had kind of developed our cost recovery scenarios, we had a staff group as well. So we ran the information through the staff group. So bringing together, facilities folks and public works folks and parking folks and, people from basically any department that might kind of touch this policy once it's adopted, making sure that they are kind of with you every step of the process, kind of socializing the different rate options and taking feedback from people. One of the things that we removed after kind of running it through the staff group was the session charge. That was something that our parking folks said, we don't really feel that comfortable with this, because what if someone's in a parking garage and they connect and then something happens and they get disconnected, then they're charged the session fee twice. And so that was ultimately something that we removed from the scenarios, the cost scenarios that we ended up taking through the process. And so I think that's a really good example of how, it was an iterative process. We made changes along the way based on feedback from the staff team. We took it through our Sustainability and Resiliency Commission, so the resident advisory group. They had great feedback. A lot of them, are EV drivers, and kind of more live in this space, and also are representatives of the community. And so kind of taking these different concepts to that group and incorporating their feedback before bringing back the final policy to City Council. And then we also have a group in Rochester called the Energy Integration Committee. This is a group of, so it's city, county, Mayo Clinic, our university, our utilities, kind of all of the big energy institutions that are in town. And we kind of have an ongoing meeting where we talk about collaborative projects. How can we align? How can we support one another? And so we took this policy through that group as well to just kind of get their feedback and make sure that we weren't planning to set a rate structure that was wildly different from one of the other organizations in town. So kind of setting the landscape here, this was our analysis of the Minnesota municipalities. So we looked into what are other cities doing. I think this is something, at least for our city council, I think knowing what the landscape is regionally is something that I think helps to kind of reduce, concerns or feeling like we're the first person in the world, we're the first city to ever, kind of consider something like this. And so taking a look at what are other cities doing and how do we compare to that. So it was kind of a mix in the cities that we looked at, some with hourly rates, some with per kWh rates, but this just kind of shows the average across the state. So for hourly rates, the average was $1.29 per hour, and kWh rates were 26 cents per kWh. And then a significant amount of free charging. So when we looked at, so kind of the first part of this was, okay, we have all these charging stations, some are free, some have hourly rates. Let's, start talking about, does hourly make sense or per kWh? And I know Torn already talked about this, and I think many of us probably also agree that per kWh rate structures are, a better way to go for, a variety of reasons. That's kind of what our analysis found as well. So looking at, the equity piece, again, not wanting, a smaller vehicle with a smaller battery to kind of have to pay the same as a larger vehicle with a larger battery, newer battery. It also kind of can depend on how charged the battery is when it plugs in. So there's a lot of factors. And so the kWh rate really does reflect that actual energy use. Supports, the efficient charger utilization, easy to pair with kind of an idle fee as well. The only, challenging piece of it is that sometimes it can be a little harder to understand for a user, their charging needs, looking at electricity use versus that easy hourly rate. But we did feel like, it does overall align to with industry standards, kind of state and federal funding. There are some programs that are funding, I believe, level 3 chargers, and they do require per kWh rates. And so if we were ever planning to go after those grants and things like that, aligning with a per kWh rate structure, now in our citywide policy, we felt like was the best bet. So again, kind of defining those goals first and then comparing these things within the different constructs of what your goals are. Next slide. So our recommendation, again, to pursue the per kWh pricing structure. Again, that alignment with state and federal programs and that flexibility to update the rate structure. So Torin talked about this a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about how we plan to update, the frequency of how we plan to update our rates. But really, it's easy to add in for electricity increases, for future level 3s, for, new fees that might come about from the charging company. There's a lot of kind of things that go into it, but we felt like per kWh would be an easier way to kind of update. Next slide, please. Okay, so now looking at, what are the actual costs to own and operate a public level 2 charging station? So what we kind of did in this piece of the project was, again, similar to Torn explained, taking a look at what are our actual costs for these stations. So most of our stations are connected to commercial buildings, our city facilities, and are on commercial rate structures with a demand charge. Level 2 chargers don't set the demand charge at these sites, and so that's not something that we had to worry about when it came to our electricity costs. However, and we can talk more about this maybe during Q&A, but that was a big piece of why we didn't pursue level 3 charging, was because of the demand charges and trying to figure out a rate structure that would be competitive regionally and also recovering those demand charges. So it's not really something we have been able to pencil out. And when it comes to municipally owned level 3 charging stations. So we are just looking at level 2s, and we are just looking at the electricity costs for those. Next, we looked at operations and maintenance. And so this includes, just including kind of our warranty plan, our cloud plan. These are kind of the things that you're, required to purchase or that we've chosen to purchase to kind of help us with, that ongoing operations and maintenance. We did build in some cost recovery for the station and the installation costs over 10 years, which gave us the total. And then that's kind of the number that we weigh the different cost options in comparison to. Next slide. So the 4 options that we looked at were fully subsidized. Some of our stations, again, were already being fully subsidized. A scenario where we recovered the operating costs. And so this looks at electricity and then those kind of annual or operations and maintenance costs. There is a full recovery cost model that recovers the station cost and the installation cost over 10 years. Again, like I had mentioned, some of our stations were grant funded, but we really were trying to build in that cost recovery for 10 years later when some of the stations would need to be replaced or are nearing the end of their useful life. And then last but not least, the reinvestment model. And so this is looking at how do we expand our charging network with our rate structures. And then also, taking into consideration kind of those hidden fees that I think you may not always be aware of unless you're kind of digging into the bills. For us, it was a 10% charge point fee. And so we worked that into all of our cost modeling because, it's the reality of the revenue that we're actually taking back in. We received direction from our city council to remain competitive with, local chargers in town, recover costs, some of the costs at least, And then again, avoid creating a profit generating program. They kind of told us, we're not interested in creating profit from this. So again, we kind of looked at some different criteria. So again, equity and accessibility, feasibility, and then cost recovery. And so when we looked at the different options, as you can see here, we really felt like option 2 was our best bet. So option 2, closely aligns with the residential rate. The residential rate is about 13 cents per kWh. This is what residents pay at home if they're charging their EVs. It, is relatively easy to administer, kind of using our existing charging software. It doesn't have, different kind of revenue accounts that we would really, need to take into consideration for in comparison to a reinvestment model. It just adds another layer onto annual and future budgeting for departments. And then it recovers the electricity and the operating and maintenance costs, while kind of remaining, more comparable to other charging costs in town, which you'll see. And so again, looking at the Rochester comparison, I thought this one was really interesting. So we saw that I believe the Minnesota state average was about 26 cents per kWh. In Rochester, the average was 18 cents. We actually have a significant amount of free charging here. And so that really was part of why I would recommend to do that analysis within your own city, because as Torrin said, people have options on where they want to go. And if we set a a per kWh rate structure that's double what everything else is, people probably won't use our chargers. And so we noticed that here in town, the average was 18 cents. So I think that fit nicely with what we had chose at the 17 cents per kWh. And then just real quick on idle fees. So we did decide to move forward with an idle fee 30 minutes after a vehicle is done charging. That's because we took a look in our dashboard, pulled the metrics on our chargers when we started this project, and we saw that on average, people were staying at our chargers for about an hour after the vehicle was done charging. These are level 2 chargers, and so that's a pretty long time for a vehicle to be at the charger. And so, we did feel that for accessibility reasons, really trying to keep these chargers available for folks, we added the $5 idle fee after the 30-minute grace period. And I think I saw a question in the chat about capping that. We did discuss that, but ultimately we did not decide to cap the idle fee at this time. So our final policy, this was kind of the process throughout 2025. Ultimately took it to City Council for adoption in October of 2025 with the effective date of January 1, 2026. Again, kind of covered all of this, but we felt like it was a good balance kind of between those goals that we set out at the beginning. So remaining competitive, trying to recover some costs, trying to make sure that these chargers are remaining available as much as they can be, transparency and consistency among all of our chargers, and then kind of that ability to scale or to make changes in the future. These graphics on these slides too, I would say, having that, oh, I think I added that in here. Yep. So building in time for a little bit of buffer time between the policy adoption and the effective date, I think really helps to build that communications campaign if you are making significant changes, either going from free charging or even hourly charging to per kWh. I think, becomes a communication conversation within your city as well. So other lessons learned, again, setting those policy goals. This is a policy decision. Decision makers in your city likely will be making the final decision. So making sure you're kind of bringing in those overall goals from the start and bringing it kind of back to that throughout the project. Considering the per kWh pricing structure and the idle fees, again, looking at benchmarking, being able to tell the story of how it compares to other cities or other chargers within your city. And then planning for annual review. We have a biannual budget here, so we are certainly working it in to the biannual budget. capital costs as well would be worked into biannual budgets for different departments. But then we are working the EV charging rate analysis into our annual fee structure conversation. So that's when we would incorporate any increases due to increasing electricity rates or something like that. And that's it for me. Thank you all so much. Here's my information, and I'll turn it back over to Torin.
Thank you very much, Kayla. Really appreciate your insights from Rochester. Lots of similarities between practice and implementation, with good research beforehand, getting everybody together in the decision-making process, doing your due diligence, finding out all that information beforehand, and then implementing something for your residents in your area that is fair to both parties. But a lot of folks understand that charging is not necessarily going to be free anymore. It was a amenity that was trying to drive adoption, but now everybody knows that there is a need for sustainability in both transportation, but also funding. So these different chargers need to have a realistic price to go with them. So thank you, Caleb, very much again. In addition to all of these insights and information for you all, we also have a new EVSE pricing calculator available on electrificationcoalition.org. This is designed for municipalities, obviously. It's an Excel-based financial planning tool, and it's designed to help local governments evaluate the viability of installing EVSE in your cities. Users can enter specific costs and revenue assumptions in the Inputs tab. That's the first page on this tool. The tool generates a summary, a results summary, and a year-by-year cash flow on the third page projection for the life of the project. For our initial draft of this tool, there is a year-by-year cash flow projection for 15 years, but you can project it out to 30 years if you wanted to. But key outputs include net capital investment, annual revenue, operating costs, simple payback period, net present value. But all of this information can help city staff decide whether to move forward with a project, compare different equipment or pricing scenarios, build financial case for EV and EVSC deployment. But it is fairly straightforward. There's a lot of space for you to put in information on your capital costs. You could always use the stock values in the tool already and adjust them one by one to see how it changes your results. Obviously, the more specific you can get with your inputs, the more specific your outputs come to your municipality. But you have inputs available for capital costs, electricity demands, annual operating costs, utilization, revenue, financial assumptions, and you also have small spaces in there for X factors, user-defined costs. So there's even spaces in this tool for things that we haven't spelled out for different cities. Your return metrics are one of the results available on the results tab, also capital costs and year one annual economics. And then going past year one, you have your full EV charging annual cash flow model on the third page. And with it being a lot of information, a lot of formulas, a lot of small details involved in this tool, there is a model explanation on the fourth page, put together by our very own Yasmin Erb and Matt Stevens Rich on our team. Super helpful putting this all together, but there is a workbook purpose, inputs, results, cash flow, the meaning of all of it, the different inputs, what they are, what they mean, and then also a results tab for the formulas, what it does, how it's working back and forth. If there's any sort of technical glitch, you can see which section to go to, what input to adjust, and how to get all of your results and cash flow looking the way that makes sense to you. And this should also help bring everybody together on your municipal teams, sharing all that information and bringing it all together. It's tough to go into a meeting trying to justify putting in new chargers, adjusting a rate without all the information spelled out. But this way you can spell it out in plain language, plain Excel, and really make it easy to digest for everybody on your city team. So definitely check that out, electrificationcoalition.org. If you are still looking to procure EVs or EVSE for your city or city fleet, you can check out driveevfleets.org. That is also another site run by Electrification Coalition and our partners at Sourcewell in Minnesota as well. Promise we don't just work with folks in Minnesota. Minnesota folks are just Minnesota nice, so it's hard not to say no. But great site there for procuring cooperative contracts for EVs and EVSE as well. But having a couple minutes left, wanted to get into a Q&A session, had some great questions submitted by registrants beforehand. Thank you all so much for registering, putting in those questions, giving us some food for thought before we started. But our first one was a question curious about your take on dwell fees overnight, or if they should only apply during the day. Kayla, I don't know if your opinion differs, but if you're putting in EVSE for all sorts of different folks to use, you should be able to put in dwell fees whenever it makes sense. Obviously, if somebody forgets to pull their car away before the evening goes out and they're there all overnight, it might be a hefty fee, but also they're not going to do it again. There's a lot of weight behind that, and they'll learn a lesson really quick. But that's just me, Kayla. I don't know if you see it differently, but you could also just do it during the day and maybe adjust the prices overnight. There's a lot of flexibility in that scenario.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For this pilot year, that's the way that we've been handling it is just, I've seen only a few that on the monthly report that have had some significant idle fees. So for the most part, people do move the vehicles pretty quickly, but we do have it set the same overnight.
Awesome. Our next question was interested in rates for public destinations when seasonality factors are at play. Get tourists during the summer, but then during the winter and fall months, it's mostly just residents. That is something you should look into adjusting the rates based on season. If you have high utilization, it's a supply and demand issue. So if you have a lot of demand, your supply price should go up, not drastically, but with the rate of utilization, a fair amount to still encourage utilization, but also not hamper anybody from wanting to use it, rolling up for a super high price, but then also rewarding those that are still in the area using your chargers, putting a reasonable rate on those in the off season as well. So adjust your pricing in between seasons. And if adjusting the pricing between seasons is difficult for charging or the software, setting an in-between point. If you have more charging sessions during one season as opposed to another, make a full average out over the year of what it would cost to save for those stations. It might make it more expensive for the off season, and that might affect utilization. But also during the busy periods, a lot of folks aren't going to have a problem with it because that would probably be cheaper than it would be for demand pricing during the busy season. But Kayla, any other insights on seasonality for chargers?
No, that's something we kind of consider taking a look at who are the users of these stations. I think that's something we may build in the future, but not really something we looked at right now. So I think, yeah, great answer.
Gotcha. Kayla, this one's for you. What's the best practice and easiest way for a city to update their rates over time?
Yeah, and I kind of touched on this at the end a little bit. We do have a biannual budget cycle. And so naturally, I think, working capital planning and costs for departments, replacements, things like that into the budget cycle. And then we do review our fees annually. And so now that this is an official policy, it's built into our city fee structure. And so we'll be annually evaluating it, taking a look again at utilization. Has this conversion to the per kWh rate structure decreased utilization? Have electricity rates increased at any of these sites? Things like that. So I would say like you had mentioned, annually, biannually.
Awesome. Another question was any recommendations for small rural communities without much traffic? So starting small, stay small. Start small with your rollout, start small with your rates. Make sure you're getting full utilization at your chargers for a modest amount, and then increase as realistic. If you have more demand that comes up, then that gives you an opportunity to put in new chargers at higher rates. But best to start out realistically as opposed to putting a lot of chargers at a high rate in first and then having to backtrack. That could affect utilization. It could scare some people away for an extended period of time until they figure out that the rates have changed. If you start small and grow, it's a lot easier, more straightforward than starting too big and having to backtrack. But Kayla, any other thoughts on that?
Definitely agreed with that. I think that's why we landed where we did, is we felt like, if we jump from $1 an hour or something like that, way up to 30 some cents per kWh, it's too much of a change, I think, and looking again at people have options for where they can charge. They don't have to use your charging stations. And so if the goal is to recover some or all of the costs of the charging stations, really that utilization is a big factor.
For sure. I think we got just enough time for two more questions. Really quickly, could you set a methodology slash calculation for automatic rate increases so as to not require a formal review annually? Yes, you could. That's difficult. Not 100% sure how the increase rates for charging prices are going to go. Not necessarily going to know automatically what utility rates are going to be, utilization rates. There's a lot of different factors that may increase at different rates. Some may decrease. You never know. If you set an automatic rate change over time, you could get it right. You could get it really, really wrong. So that's one of those things you got to weigh with convenience over a little bit more homework. If you set it, if you set it now and it's wrong in the future, then you have to backtrack to figure out what adjustments you have to make. But if you take the time to meet regularly and adjust, you can get it right each time. So kind of get what you work for.
Mhm.
Kayla, any thoughts on that one before I have
Yeah.
one last question for you?
Okay, we did consider building in kind of a factor like that with a certain percent increase each year. We ultimately decided, again, because of all of the different factors, we weren't sure what the result of this was going to be to build it into the fee schedule and kind of do that analysis for now.
Awesome. And last one before we go, we've had a lot of questions about this before the session started and during the session. Kayla, thoughts on municipal use between level 2 and DCFC, pros and cons?
Ooh, it's a hard one. Yeah, right now we are finding it cost prohibitive to own and operate level 3 chargers. And it's not for us even really the capital cost. I mean, there are a lot of grants available. There's a lot of programs to, get some or all the funding that you need to install level 3s. For us, it's really the ongoing cost. It's the utility cost. It's that demand charge that the level 3 chargers will set if not connected to a building with a significant load. And a lot of buildings with significant loads are kind of near near their capacity as well. So requiring a lot of electrical increase, things like that. And so really the cost for us just don't pencil out right now.
Makes sense. Thank you, Kayla. Noticing time, I think we timed that out pretty well. I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon, going over EVSE rates for municipal chargers. If you have any uh, EVSE rate needs, check out our tool at electrificationcoalition.org. If you're still in need of EVSE itself, check out driveevfleets.org. And for any other questions for Rochester, Minnesota, reach out to Kayla Betzold for more information. But thank you all for your time. Have a great rest of your day and hope to see you on the next Electrification Coalition webinar.